It's Monday Night Football once again, and we have an interesting one on tonight's slate with Niners-Vikings. Of course, some key injuries today. Deebo Samuel out for likely a few weeks. Christian McCaffrey banged up, expected to go today. And I have a lot of fun things to share with you guys, including how last night went for me on the Showdown. Of course, it's a busy birthday weekend for me. Appreciate hearing from all of you guys, sending along your kind wishes. And yesterday, you could see on the screen here, Sunday Night Football blitzed off my ass. Put in some entries because I got to tell you guys, the Jordan Love thing, the Christian Watson thing did not go well in the main slate, and neither did Devontae Adams thing after he cried his way to getting fed a bunch of targets on the first drive. That went poorly. Yesterday, though, did end up clocking second in the mini-max. Of course, this exact lineup that I'm hovering over right now would have made me $47K if it had found its way into the big tournament. Instead, found its way into the mini-max with a 50-cent entry, $5K to first place. But I think this is really, for me, as much as you guys, to really kind of cement that what we're doing process-wise, this is now 2 straight weeks where I've had pretty big payouts on Showdown slates. I really do believe strongly that my Showdown play accelerates, gets the best around this time of year. This time last year is when I had my 25K win on the Browns-Bengals Showdown slate too. So really more for me than it is for you guys, but I think equally for both of us that you got to stick with your process. You got to stick with what works. You have to identify the things that keep hitting over and over again. And for me, last night, of course, this lineup you can see on the screen, the winning team, the one that finished in first place, I believe it was a solo first place as well, and me tied with 4 other people for second place. It was a team here where A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, Cedric Wilson. I shared that in common with first place. The one difference was I went Eagles D, they went Dolphins D. That is what led to the first place winners. I think it was a 3-way chop in the Millie Maker solo ship on the mini max yesterday. So that's the way it goes. That's how it be. But I think it's really more of a testament that I've said before, I sometimes worry that when I'm this close and I'm knocking on the door of the wins, that maybe these are the slates where it should be a thing where if you run good enough, those are your wins that make up for an entire season. For me right now, though, I feel like the process is good. Things are looking good. Playing lineups that have under a $48,000 salary, sometimes even less than that. That's also running pretty good, but this is how it goes here. So you're in good hands. We're talking to Mr. Second Place, a silver medalist of the Mini-Max, who could do a better job for you today. But let's talk about it. Of course, this is a Monday Night Football slate. We have 25 implied points for San Francisco, 18 implied points for Minnesota. So we're going to get into the details of this one. And the first thing I think I have to highlight right away is going to be that absence of Deebo Samuel. In the past, in the splits without Deebo Samuel, I went on RotoViz and checked it out. So 40 games in split for Brandon Ayuk with Deebo Samuel. In those 40 games, 12.7 fantasy points PPR-wise. 4.05 receptions, 0.38 touchdowns, 6.2 targets per game. When Deebo Samuel is out, Ayuk has had 11 games, 15.2 fantasy points per game. Of course, in PPR format again, 5.2 receptions per game. So 1 extra reception for Brandon Ayuk per game. Receiving TDs, 0.45 compared to that 0.38. So a little bit of an increase in touchdown equity as well. Targets, 7.8 compared to 6.2. Point being, Brandon Ayuk playing a Vikings defense we know is not that good. Ayuk, of course, a guy we've highlighted a bunch here as one of the stars of what I look at in terms of the EPA metrics on the year. Brandon Ayuk, a 0.58 EPA per target while getting 7.4 targets per game. So a lot of efficiency, add a lot of volume. He is a player that, for me, I think is the one we go around to build here. So let's go. Brandon Ayuk, captain, to start it off. Shouts to the chat, as always, our boy Historical Anomalies. Nice, Spags. I am the Showdown champ again here on Splash Play. Nowhere else in the world, but just here on Splash Play, the Showdown King. Shout out to our guy Obi-Wan. Appreciate all you guys being here. Belated happy birthday wishes from our guy Steven. I appreciate all you guys being here and being friends to me in my delicate 39th year of life as we are on the death march to 40 that nobody wants to see me have in particular. Not because they want to see me die, to be clear, but just because I think I don't want to be 40. I'm so youthful and exuberant. It's all going to go away the second I hit 40. Ayuk props keep going up. Started the week in the 60s, up to 73.5 now. I mean, I think that's people smartening up to that data, that split data without Deebo. Also, the matchup in general, like I would have been very willing to play Ayuk even without Deebo in general. But I think, obviously, Deebo being out, I think Ayuk still would have been a good captain play, even if Deebo were getting his full reps, full health, and all of that. But I think we'll see how the ownership looks. Of course, the ETR data, once again, not out today, so we're just going to look on stochastics, but we'll look at stochastic projections and ownership projections in a moment. But point being, this is the Minnesota defense on the year, giving up 330 yards, getting up a 0 flat EPA per drop back, 0 flat EPA per pass. Obviously, if that were a positive number, you'd feel even more confident attacking it, but still a 0 flat means that they're allowing the opposing teams to keep things moving on schedule. For a Niners team that is very good analytically, that does get the ball ahead of where it's supposed to be in every single situation, that's what the EPA metric tells you. This is a team that I think should be able to take advantage of the Minnesota defense pretty well, no matter what the situation. And again, to add further credence to sort of the pass catchers for the Niners, 86% catchable ball rate allowed by Minnesota, one of the worst marks in the league. Giving up some decent plays as well via motion. On motion pass attempts, giving up 0.12 EPA. The Niners run motion 27 times per game in the run game, 22 times per game in the pass game, and are very good at it. So I do think the motion here is something that should be able to keep the Niners active and give them some really high opportunity spots as well. The weakest spot for the Minnesota defense is going to be going against the slot. 0.4 EPA allowed there compared to a 0.2 EPA allowed out wide and a negative 0.12 EPA allowed to tight end. So Kittle can still get there. Kittle, I think, still a viable captain play for sure, especially without Debo out there and a banged up McCaffrey. But I really think this is an Ayuk spot more than a Kittle spot. Of course, it's showdown. What I think kind of hand building this line about doesn't matter quite as much. It's just getting unique lineups, getting low salary builds to still have a chance to win a tournament. But I do think I have to highlight here that I think that it is a game where Ayuk is substantially better play than Kittle. And Kittle, for what it's worth, also a little bit less productive in games without Debo, which is kind of counterintuitive, given that you expect he would just have more opportunity, more slot routes and all of that. That has not been the case historically with George Kittle when Kebo is out. True Spags, I hit 49 today. I'm going to pick out my plot. Here he goes. Shout out Dick Chuck here. Appreciate all of you guys who are going through the same rapidly aging before our eyes that I feel in my soul. So McCaffrey banged up here, as we've talked about. I've been worried about the workload for him over the last few weeks. In one of the games, he went out with his neck being banged up. They were actively looking at that on the sideline. Now it's oblique injury / a rib injury that he apparently can play through, but an oblique can really easily reoccur in this kind of spot. So I have some concerns there. I think there are definitely some lineups to build without Christian McCaffrey. That said, this is a huddle single entry here, I believe 10K to first place. So I'm not going to try to play hero ball with that. I think you put in McCaffrey in the flex, a little bit less inclined to get to in captain. We'll see what the ownership looks like for McCaffrey at captain, but I got to imagine it's 15 to 20% overall. So that's something to me where if people are going to play him as a captain that heavy, a guy who's injured, who could certainly leave this game. I could certainly also see a blowout build that ends up getting Jordan Mason or Eli Mitchell more touches. There's a lot of ways McCaffrey doesn't make it there as a captain, even though this is a pretty good spot on paper. Minnesota giving up a positive EPA in the red zone per rush attempts, 0.13 EPA per red zone rush compared to a negative 0.12 EPA per red zone pass. So it's a good McCaffrey matchup on paper, but the injuries, I think, we're pushing more towards going Purdy at captain, going Ayuk at captain, still going Kittle at captain. I think CMC at captain, it's like you're getting taxed two ways, where you're dealing with the injury, you're dealing with a lot of ownership. I think those are two things that shouldn't necessarily go perfectly aligned. Other players here. So Historical Anomalies is talking about some of the prop markets. One thing that jumped out to me is there are really heavy no touchdown props for all the Vikings receivers. Brandon Powell, I believe, has an 80% chance of not scoring a touchdown. Hockenson had like a 75% chance. Addison has a 77% chance. So these markets are really pushing towards these guys not getting there. The one guy who I thought was noticeable by his absence in terms of these no's on the touchdown props was KJ Osborne. Osborne, of course, incredibly involved, theoretically taking over the Justin Jefferson role was the reports we got last week. Didn't really matter to his outlay, but on the year, not that great. Negative 0.3 EPA per target, getting 36.3 routes per game, which is more than Jordan Addison's 31. Obviously, a lot of that is reflecting the pre-Justin Jefferson injury situation, but I do think that Osborne is a player that I can force my way to here. Again, I think Addison people want to play. Hockenson, I know people want to play. I think Osborne is the guy that people don't necessarily want to play. I still like Brandon Powell. Brandon Powell's very involved for the non-role that he has, running, 15 snaps per game, 14 routes per game, getting targeted pretty aggressively. A 28% target per snap rate for Brandon Powell compared to 9% for KJ Osborne, 13% for Jordan Addison. So Powell's in play as well, but I don't expect him to score a touchdown here, which you probably need at a $2,800 salary. So I will play some Powell, but I think for the sake of this hand build, we're going to go with Osborne in this lineup. Niners D, what's the price tag on these guys? It's got to be pretty bad, right? 5K for Niners D. Niners D really good against the pass, negative 0.22 EPA per drop back, negative 0.25 EPA per pass. Kirk Cousins definitely lost that a safety blanket. Justin Jefferson, there's no really positive spots to attack on the field. They're negative EPAs out wide, negative EPAs out of the slot allowed by the Niners D. A very negative EPA allowed to tight ends, negative 0.33, which is one of the best marks in the league. So your Hockenson shares, he could still get there in the crush of volume, but don't expect him to be efficient with his touches. Don't expect him to break any big outlier plays multiple times in the game. That's sort of what that metric will highlight. A red zone rush, the Niners D is not that good. So Madison Akers, maybe Akers, $1,800 salary, getting some red zone work already. Madison 3 red zone touches per game, Akers 0.8 per game. Ooh, I think this is a hero call here. I think we're going to Akers in this one. Don't know that I have the most confidence in him. It's not like the workload's that great for him overall, but man, is that smart? I don't think that's smart. I think we're going to be unique enough if we go to Osborne and Madison. So let's not do the hero ball here. It's such a big price difference, but I think that might be something as well that drives people to go to Akers more. Akers, a guy that fantasy communities have certainly liked over the course of time a lot more than Alexander Madison. Madison's still getting the majority of the work here, even if it is closer to a 50-50 share. Do you think they trust him a little bit more in the red zone? I am going to go with Madison and Osborne here. GM, I'm so fucking tired, but we show up for the Squirt Squad. Hey, same here. I think that applies for both me on this side of the camera and you guys wherever you're watching. I appreciate you guys being here as always. I was drinking 10% beers yesterday like they were water. So I am a shockingly not hungover, which is maybe a bad reflection on me as well as a good one. Who else we put here? Akers is on his way to 50-50. I agree with that. But I think, again, with the price difference, everybody knows that too. So if people are going to go, oh, this is pretty much a 50-50 split, and I can get Akers at 1,800 and I get Madison at 6,600, I think that's one of the things that's going to lead to ownership being a little bit fucked up towards Akers. So for me, I'm going to go with Madison in this one. But I think they're both, I don't think either is a much stronger play than the other is the best way to put that. All right. Purdy, we now can't afford Purdy because we did not go to Akers. That's pretty tough. Purdy certainly can get here just by the crux of these guys, the crush of these guys getting here, but we're not going to go that way. Let's go Jake Moody coming off the down game. I feel like they should be able to move the ball into position. Maybe they struggle in the red zone a little bit more because of McCaffrey's injuries, not having Debo. So let's go with Moody here. And I would like to leave at least 2K on the table, if not 1,500, but definitely more than 1,000, I think, for any of these builds where you're getting normal players in, not anybody weird, none of the $200 guys. You definitely want to leave some salary on the table for that one. Kyle Juszczyk. Kyle Juszczyk plays a good amount. Never the most fun play, but the only time he ever makes sense to play is going to be on one of these showdown builds. Juszczyk on the year, 0.59 EPA per target, 0.1 EPA per rush, 4.5 intended touches per game is actually not that bad for a guy like Kyle Juszczyk. He's not getting targeted in every game, though. That's the biggest issue. He's only been targeted in 2 games so far. But when he does get targeted, he's actually getting okay work. So a little bit of fluidity there. Ray McLeod, probably another guy you can go to as well to leave some money on the table. He's at 2,200. That would get us pretty close here. McLeod sort of soaks up some of those Debo routes you would think, the ones that are close to the line of scrimmage. Kyle's a showdown and best ball smash. I don't know if he's a best ball smash, but he's certainly a player you can play in best ball. All right, McLeod, 2,200. Juszczyk, 600. You got like Juszczyk benefits a little bit from McCaffrey not being able to go, I would think. But I do think that McLeod's just going to get a little bit more work and have a little more PPR upside and maybe some red zone equity. No, Kyle Juszczyk definitely gets more red zone work. Juszczyk gets 2 red zone targets, 1 red zone rush per game that he's actually getting targets. It's such a weird stat line for Juszczyk where he's played in every game, but because he's only been in 2 games, like the 2 games that he's been involved, he's like getting meaningful work. I think it's Juszczyk. I think that McLeod to me is a better play, but we're leaving 2,800 on the table here. We're still getting mostly good players. Juszczyk, I feel like kind of cannibalizes Moody a little bit, but not playing the Niners D. I feel like a lot of people will force in that Niners D. So this is going to be our final hand-built team here. We're going to go to the optimizer and the projections after this one. Brandon Ayuk, captain, CMC at the flex, KJ Osborne, Alexander Madison, Jake Moody coming off of a very disappointing game that he actively lost the Niners against the Browns. Kyle Juszczyk here. Again, I really do think that Moody and Juszczyk kind of play off each other in a bad way, where Moody, if he's kicking field goals, that probably means that Juszczyk didn't get his 1 luck box touchdown, but we're going to roll with it. I think it makes a little more sense to me than McLeod. I feel like that McLeod lineup probably gets duped pretty heavy. But we'll see. There we go. We are in. So now let's go to the stochastic projections. Take a look at who they are saying projects to be the top ones here. Juice seems to get targets in HV situations randomly. Makes sense if CMC isn't right. I think that's a fair way to look at it. I also like that we're calling him Juice. I think Juice, the only Juice I know is OJ Simpson, and I don't want to get on the wrong side of that guy. I don't know if you guys have heard. CMC dropping a massive load on Spags tonight. Yeah, just like he has the last 2 weeks, right, Lenny? Let's look at their top projected players, though. McCaffrey banged up. Certainly looking pretty good here as the #1 overall play. Again, he's going to be in every lineup, though. You're not getting a salary discount for the injury. You're not getting a projection discount for the injury. You're probably not getting an ownership discount for the injury. So that's something to keep in mind with McCaffrey, that playing some builds without him, I think tonight, even more prominent than it would be otherwise. Brandon Ayuk, number 2, 19.3 projection for him. He is probably going to come up quite a bit. Brock Purdy, 18.1, third projected top guy here. Kirk Cousins at number 4, 15.98 projection. So a pretty big chasm between these three guys and Kirk Cousins. So I would imagine you're going to see a lot more ownership going there than a guy like Kirk Cousins. And maybe that makes Kirk captain builds the Vegas bit of live. I don't think Kirk has outlier upside against a Niners D that is pretty good. But still, Cousins, I think that low of a projection, probably going to be a little bit under-owned relative to how a QB should be perceived when he's probably the only way they can stay in this game. And Hockenson rounds at the top 5, 14.55 projection, not too far ahead of Addison, Madison, and then there goes Kittle. Kittle's a blitz targeter or no? I mean, he's in the block sometimes on blitzing, so I don't know that I would read too much into that. Certainly can get there. But again, it really worried me to see that he wasn't better over the course of time with Debo off the field. To me, that means that he might be in the block a little bit more during those plays, because if he's not getting more targets, it means he's probably not running more routes. So that's something with Kittle that I think he's going to be a guy that people flock to a little bit more, just because of the assumption that you're not getting slot targets to Debo. You're going to see Kittle get slot targets instead. But I think instead you just see him in the block a little bit more to open opportunity for other guys. But that's me just kind of going off of holding a finger to the wind sort of thing. Not anything that's the most concrete. Values, top value play, Josh Oliver. Oliver still playing, I think, a good amount of snaps per game. Where is he at? Josh Oliver, negative 0.3 EPA, but 24.3 snaps per game, running only 3.8 routes per game. So that's, no, actually 6.5 routes per game, excuse me. Ty Chandler's running 3.8 routes per game, but Oliver 6.5, not the biggest needle to thread there. All right, so he's coming up as a value. Good to know. N'Keal Harry, number 2. If N'Keal Harry is even active, I guess. CJ Ham, number 3. Charlie Warner, number 4. And Kyle Juszczyk, number 5. So I don't expect this to be a slate where people are really jamming into 2K plays. Josh Oliver, I know people do love, but certainly a player that I think people are not going to flock to besides the projection here. Kittle going to want to eat a national belated tight end day. That's fair. It is a day. Didn't he create it? He's National Tight End Day guy, and all the tight ends really did go off yesterday in a way that I guess made them seemingly aware. Everyone besides Luke Musgrave went off yesterday. So maybe that matters to them. It shouldn't, but maybe it does. Showdown ownership, according to Stochastic. And as always mentioned here, I would recommend paying for a Stochastic data package, even if you use another site for some other stuff. It's important to have Stochastic data in your life because so much of the field uses it. But of course, the ownership data, the projections, that all moves around throughout the course of the day. Guys get rolled in, guys get rolled out. If the total moves, if they see something that just doesn't seem right, they adjust that as we go. So just keep that in mind here. Don't just go off of what you're seeing on the screen right now at 11:35 a.m. on the East Coast. Christian McCaffrey, number 1 projected owned play, is 64%, 16% at captain as well. So maybe a little bit of an ownership discount on CMC. I guess the one thing you could say for him is that we have seen a lot of guys lately. Yesterday, Kenneth Walker projected for 30% around the industry, ends up going for 50%. And obviously ends up busting at that ownership, which sucks. He was not Raheem Mostert, unfortunately. But I think one key observation from early in the season so far is that the field really is keying in on the best plays with no risk or no perceived risk, more than ownership projections from ETR, from Stochastic, from, I don't know, else, Jim Saberson. All the sites out there that are doing ownership, I think, can't properly project the field right now because of how much the field is really saying, hey, this guy is the one who's not going to kill me. He's going to give me a floor, give me a ceiling. So with a guy like McCaffrey here, I think because of the injury, you don't see him get steamed up as much as you might normally on a slate like this, where if you had a 16% ownership projection, I would think he gets to 25. My guess is because of the injury, he still stays around 16 to 20%, even though it certainly seems like a player that would feel pretty cozy in this match if you know he's going to be healthy and full go. 64.1% CMC thought Lenny was the only one smart enough to play him. It's true. Lenny has been the hipster band playing Christian McCaffrey hits all by himself for so long. But now the public can finally get there because it's a showdown slate. So Christian McCaffrey, he only makes sense on showdowns. I think that's how the public treats that. Brandon Ayuk, number 2, expected ownership 57%, not getting too much of an ownership discount at 13% here. So Brock Purdy you can go to at a little bit less, but he's still pretty chalky. 9% in captain, 53% overall. TJ Hockenson, 42.5% expected ownership, 7.5% of that at captain. Kirk Cousins, 42.3% overall, 5.8% at captain. So nobody's sneaking up on you here. In terms of ownership, I guess the ownership plays would be Niners captain. I find it hard to believe this. The public loves playing defense captains, loves jamming into defense so much when it is a game script like this one, where it's a team that we perceive as bad, decent Vegas total showing some separation between them. I don't think the Niners are going to be this low owned. But if they were this low owned, they would be a good captain play or an interesting captain play and definitely an interesting flex play. With this ownership, though, I would guess they get closer to 40 and 10 to 15 at captain would be my guess. Don't forget to like and comment after for Algo Boost. Yes, please, of course, guys. Don't forget to like here on Splash Play. Of course, Splash Play going on every day, usually at 11 a.m., Monday to Friday here. But of course, doing the showdown videos Monday and Thursday. Tomorrow, our best ball review show where hopefully things will look better for me than it did last week. Wednesday, we'll be doing the Spags rankings here, the abridged version. So things here going on every day on Splash Play. Fantasy football all year round. With your old pal Spags. What more can you ask for? All right. Any low-owned captain plays that seem interesting? I think Kittle's the one that stands out. Addison, Osborne, you could take flyers there. A little bit baffled that Brandon Powell is expected to be played at captain more than Addison, more than KJ Osborne. Kirk Cousins, I think there's a very easy picture to tell of how he could be a winning captain. Obviously not the most fun picture, given that it is Kirk Cousins playing a Niners defense that we know is pretty good, but certainly some vulnerabilities put on tape last week. The Browns were able to move the ball against them. There have been teams, the Rams moved the ball against them, as we talked about earlier in the season, and it was a big surprise to me. So I think there may be some ways that you could expect that the Vikings could find a way to move the ball. It's just you have the confidence in it. I don't quite so much, but I certainly get it. And Jawan Jennings, I'll highlight here, 3% captain. I don't see how he possibly has a shot to be an outlier enough player to get there at captain, but he is direct leverage against Ayuk, direct leverage against Kittle. So I think there is a logic in going to Jennings, more so in the flex, but he's only going to be 22% owned. But 3% at captain, I think kind of interesting. So something to consider in some of those builds. But let's grab our projections, check the optimizer here so we will see how the math is going to push people towards things. DraftKings Showdown on Fantasy Cruncher. And we'll run the Sims right after this one. Of course, we'll complete the picture with our 3 takeaways about how to get unique on this particular slate tonight. All right. Get out of here, Jags Saints. You were an okay, but not actually a more fun game on Thursday Night Football, but like the ugliest version of a high scoring game. So I don't know that I want to give the Jags and the Saints too many flowers for how they did on Thursday Night Football. All right. Projections uploaded. Teams DK is pricing up defense and kickers this season. They've definitely been too easy to just jam in for a lot of the pro players. Like when you see guys like Ricky D, like the sharp 150 maxers putting in, so many lineups that have 2 defenses, 2 kickers, just because it's a way to get unique. That does give you a pretty good projection. I think it's a little bit too exploitable, but that's obviously me. I don't want to play a ton of defenses and kickers for the most part, unless, it's just a way to get unique. So it's been a crutch for a lot of sharp players out there for sure. Brandon Ayuk, 72% of lineups, not coming in every single one, though, 16% at captain, so that's good to know. Brandon Powell coming up 48% of the time at captain, so I don't think that's a play that'll be too highly owned, but it does allow you to jam in every possible stud, and Brandon Powell has been involved. He's basically only out there on third downs plays for the most part, where they're going 3 wide receiver sets. Brandon Powell, pretty good player, getting targets. I don't think he's a good captain play. I think he's an okay flex play, but I guess he might be a little bit overplayed at captain just because of what he represents for the field. Brock Purdy and almost every lineup. So Ayuk and Purdy both in 88% of lineups, but not getting into every single one. McCaffrey, 68% at the flex and not yet. And getting in. So McCaffrey's not in every lineup. So nobody's appearing in every single lineup unless there's somebody I'm missing here. Yeah, no. I guess just Brandon Powell is appearing in every lineup. So what does that mean for Brandon Powell? It means that the projections probably push you towards him a little bit more as a value, whether it be in the flex, whether it be at the captain. So the way to get different from Brandon Powell would be to lean on one of these other receivers. And I think that's KJ Osborne. Osborne's not coming up at all. Addison not coming up too much either. So I think you just like Powell, I'll play some of. I will tell you that because I do think he's a pretty solid player. But if he's going to be over-owned just because the math works out where he's the guy that just gets into lineups to make everything else work, that does make it a little bit tough to trust Brandon Powell and trust his ownership being where the field says it's going to be. The sites say that the field's ownership is going to be, rather. So I think Osborne's a pretty good play. If he's only coming up once here, the projection isn't a fit. The price tag, not that great for him. $6,400. So you're not getting the savings there. It's kind of like we talked about with Madison versus Akers. Because you're not getting the savings, that's sort of what makes you unique. So I think Brandon Powell is going to be an obvious play for a lot of sharp players, and that's a little bit scary for them. Kickers coming up, only 12% of lineups, not getting much of the Vikings kicker. So I don't expect the Vikings to move into the red zone that often, but if they do, hard to imagine them punching in a lot of touchdowns. So maybe the Vikings kicker can get there as well. Defense is getting a good amount of Niners, but they're not looking like a particularly strong play here at 28%. who's not coming up at all. Akers not coming up that much, so I guess he's not going to be the value projection play that comes up. Projections force people more to Madison, so maybe the Akers play does end up low owned as a result. I do think, again, I would guess sharp players forcing more Powell. And I would think that sharp players forcing more Cam Akers to force themselves to get unique would be two of the theses that I'd be going with here. Need Ayuk to outscore the Niners defense by 1 point. I think it's possible. But we'd be wise to fade Ayuk. Dustin, I think you're in good hands, but obviously we'll see how that goes. Game script, the Vikings are behind and Cousins is throwing. Powell could get more steam. It's certainly true. Look, I think Powell's not sneaking up on anybody based on this data, but I would check the ETR data again. If you hear Brandon Powell, like we talk about a lot here, like I believe if you watch this stream, you should watch the stochastic stream later today. You ideally put on live before lock. I think that's a good show that helps catch things up there. But watch their content, watch ETR's content. Run Pure, I think, also does a pretty good job with the print factory streams they do. Those three are the ones really driving ownership for some of the showdown slates. So just keep that in mind. If you hear Brandon Powell talked about is this great play in all of those, I would bet that he comes in over the ownership projection. If he ends up just them being like, he's kind of a flimsy play, I think that's where you don't see him get steamed up too much. But Brandon Powell, to me, seems like the Michael Gallup from that last slate where the opportunity is going to be there. Gallup absolutely could have caught a couple passes and made a winning lineup. But if he doesn't get there, it's one way to get different right away is to just have less Powell or play him in more unique configurations. SF, Prevent D, Prince money for TJ and Addison. I guess so. I mean, it's possible. I don't think it would for Addison because Addison's way of scoring is mostly getting those deep 50-yard touchdowns. And that's the one thing you would think they would sell to stop. I don't have a lot of faith in the Vikings offense overall this week, but that's probably not that big of a shocker. But just going against the Niners is not something I normally want to see a fringe offense like the Vikings doing and trying to get success with. All right, let me sign in here to the Sims. I thought I was signed in, but apparently not. Stochastic also rolling out their NBA stuff coming out this week too, which I'll be on some streams for Stochastic Wednesday and Friday with my pal Josh Engelman doing the deeper dive show. So if you want to see me talking NBA, I've dusted myself off there. I've already been working on my data sheet, getting it where it needs to be for NBA season as well. But the NFL NBA crossover back in my life. So I don't know, come hang out or whatever. But check out their product, their late swap simulator thing. Apparently going to be pretty cool and very important for NBA, of course, with how late swap goes. So check that stuff out on Stochastic as well. I'll give them the free plugs. All right. That's as if they need it. Of course, they really need the free splash play plugs. But yeah. All right. Here we go. 30% to first. You can use your custom projections here if you want. This is how I split the ETR and stochastic projections when I get there. But let's run the simulation. Let's do it. Yes, NBA, LFG. Yes, if you're tilted by NFL, NBA is certainly a lot more predictable. Am I planning to play NBA every day? No, I can't do that with the baby, especially how the timing works out where usually the baby's bath time, Lucas' bath time is around 7 o'clock. So I'll be doing the slates where I can do it. I certainly had my biggest wins in NBA. Obviously, NFL has been pretty good to me too over the course of time, but 50K plus wins. My hottest run ever was NBA in the playoffs a couple years ago where I won 75K over the course of a month. So I love NBA. I think it's the best sport for you to play if you want to win money, but the attention span, especially on the East Coast where you have to be locked in basically from 6 o'clock until fucking 11, 12 o'clock to make sure you're swapping and optimizing and all that. Makes it a little bit tough, but that's where you can win money for sure. All right, top ROI lineup here. Fucking Brandon Powell, Brandon Ayuk, Brock Purdy, Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, Kirk Cousins. So a Brandon Powell captain lineup popping up pretty well here. Let's look at the overall exposures for the top 150 and see on the sim here. Of course, the sims, what it does is tries to generate 10,000 lineups on a showdown. It's hard to do that. So instead, this one got 4502. And then what we'll do is have those 4502 lineups compete against each other 40,000 times to determine how this goes. Brock Purdy, top exposure player in the flex. 63% of lineups have Purdy. Makes sense. He probably comes along for the ride with McCaffrey lineups or for Brandon Ayuk lineups as well. Kittle lineups too. Purdy's going to make a lot of them. Brandon Powell, again, getting jammed in here. I think he's a fine play. I think he's a fine play, much like Jeff Wilson was a fine play yesterday, much like Cedric Wilson was a fine play yesterday, much like Michael Gallup was a fine play last week. He's a little bit too cheap for the role. That said, I think there's going to be a lot of Brandon Powell floating around. So I think you're going to do better. You're probably going to win more tournaments trying to get leverage against Brandon Powell. But if you're just putting in a cash lineup, I imagine Brandon Powell gets in there pretty easily. Highest leverage players, according to the sim. Brandon Ayuk, they're trying to get in a whole lot more at captain, 50% Ayuk at captain. So the sims agree with me that Ayuk captain, even if it is a little bit chalky, still a strong configuration to get to. Brandon Powell wants you to get a lot of him in the flex, Purdy a lot in the flex. Hawkinson wants you to get a little bit more of 10% exposure. So you're getting 2.5% more than the field. But at captain, nobody really jumping out, it looks like, besides Ayuk. So this is a lot of Brandon Ayuk. So good job on the thumbnail, Spags. Did not see this. The downside, though, Sim Bros will be playing a lot of Ayuk today. So if you're playing Ayuk at captain, find a way to get unique. Find a way to get in one or two players between 5% owned and 20% owned. Drop some salary on the table. That's sort of how I think you would have to handle a Brandon Ayuk situation. Highest cashing lineup. This would be the one if you wanted to play Showdown Cash. You could probably go with this one. Niners D at captain, Alexander Madison, Brandon Ayuk, Brandon Powell, Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey. Big day for Brandon's. A lot of Ayuk and Powell popping up here. Highest win rate lineup. Let's see. What's the highest win rate lineup? This one with McCaffrey, Niners D, Madison, Powell, Brock Purdy, George Kittle. Duplicated a lot, but it does win a lot. So this is one that would be like the 100-person chop, most likely, if it ended up winning. So not one that you should try to play here. It's important to keep an eye. Salary, dupes number, ownership sum as well. You keep an eye on that. But I think the ones that tend to have the highest win rate but not a high ROI tends to mean that they're more likely to be dupes. So something to keep in mind there. Let's look at the least cashing lineups. So I think this is kind of interesting too. So this is one where, like I've talked about here, scrolling down to find the plays which just have a little bit of a chance to win, but aren't going to be as easily featured in terms of the builds here, I think is going to be something to highlight. But if you get a Jordan Mason captain, like this is a really narrow outcome. Mason, Niners D, Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, Josh Oliver, Kirk Cousins. So this is one that I would not actually play here, even though it does seem to win 0.1% of the time, which I think would be 4 lineups out of the 10 out of the 40,000 sims. This lineup wins 4 times. A good call. I forgot to look at this. Any breakdown of the 3 3s, 4 2s, etc. So based on the pure math of it on Fantasy Cruncher, it does look like we are seeing not a lot of 5-1 Niners, but some more 4-2 Niners, and honestly, pretty even distribution. So less 5-1s overall than you would expect, especially in this kind of build. You could maybe force your way to Niners 5-1s a little bit more. Obviously, that would fit the game script and how we expect this game to go. But it does feel like they are a little bit underrepresented in terms of, captain defenses 5-1s. All a little underrepresented for what this game flow should be like. Let's look at a lineup that I actually would take from the bottom here would be definitely still want to get Ayuk in. I really feel like one without Ayuk would not be my ideal. I'm going to filter by Ayuk. I'm going to try to show you guys a lineup I would actually play from the bottom here, because this is really where you're going to find, like, for a showdown, you're going to find the lineups that actually give you a shot to win as just ones that are not going to be like easily grabbed by somebody from a sim tool. Like that's why I've been exporting everything to Excel. It's sorting out through there. I think that is sort of the key thing you can do for yourself. I'm actually going to start with Ayuk. So let's find a low owned Ayuk captain. Brandon Ayuk. All right. And what actually wins? Ayuk, Niners D, Mitchell, Addison, Osborne, Vikings. That's pretty tough. I don't think that gets there. Give me one with McCaffrey. Okay, this one is kind of interesting. So this one, you're getting Ayuk at captain. You're still spending $50K, but you're putting in CJ Ham and Eli Mitchell to cut the ownership product down. You're not playing any of the Vikings receivers, so that'll also get that ownership product down too. Ayuk, CJ Ham, Christian McCaffrey, Eli Mitchell, Jake Moody, Kirk Cousins. The one caveat I would have for this lineup is that I do worry that Eli Mitchell's gotten passed up by Jordan Mason. Kyle Shanahan has kind of double spoke about that, where he said that Mitchell still has earned a role based on what he's done over the course of time, but Jordan Mason is running ahead of him, or was running ahead of him last week after he was coming off the knee injury. Mitchell was, that is. So I don't know that I trust Mitchell, but I do think that this kind of build makes a little bit more sense. This is not all we're doing, Vinny, but you're fine no matter what. Brandon Ayuk, Brandon Powell, Christian McCaffrey, Eli Mitchell, Jordan Addison, Jordan Mason. This one's kind of interesting because you're getting all 3 of the Niners running backs in. That is definitely going to be unique. It doesn't feel like the most likely outcome, but I think that's certainly a lineup you could play. Probably more inclined for this one, though. CJ Ham. It's a weird lineup, but maybe punches in a 1-yard touchdown. Maybe gets a reception on top of that. I think that's sort of how that could go. But there we go. I think that's it. So let's close it out, guys. 3 takeaways on how to get unique here. Number one is going to be, I think, just being careful about which Vikings receiver you choose. It does feel like Brandon Powell's coming up a little bit too much. Still think he's a perfectly fine play. The projection makes sense. The salary makes sense. But if people just end up a little bit too cozy, like if getting a guy in makes it a lot easier to build the lineups they want to build, that guy just ends up overowned. So I think Brandon Powell, I like him as a player, played him a lot in the main slate last week, and I didn't do a whole lot for me besides helping me get unique from some of the other cheap players out there. But I do think that in this particular slate, he'll either be in a winning lineup and it'll end up a little more duped if it's a high salary lineup, or he's going to be something that you can get different on and maybe get direct leverage. If KJ Osborne scores a touchdown, those lineups probably don't have Powell and Osborne. So I think that's one way to get unique right away. Number two, I do feel like going back to Jake Moody makes a good amount of sense. Did not pop up a lot ownership wise. Let me just make sure that he wasn't that well represented. In 19% ownership, 1.5% at captain. There is certainly a world if McCaffrey is more hurt than we realize. Jake Moody could end up with 5 field goals today and really be the full bounce back play after completely costing the Niners that last game against the Browns. So I think Moody makes a lot of sense, both in terms of the showdown game theory of it all, as well as the real life game theory of him coming off the bad game. Always buying where there's blood in the streets for DFS is a good strategy. And a number 3 way to get unique would be, it's not playing Ayuk captain. I mean, this is always going to be the case, but like if you play Ayuk captain, and I really do think he's the best captain play tonight, you got to leave a lot of salary on the table. Like I think this slate in particular, it feels like you really have to force your way to leave some salary on the table. So always leave salary on the table. You should always be leaving at least $1,000 on the table, unless you have a really unique build that can, like you get a really weird captain and 2 under 10% owned plays. That one can be played at a 49.9 at even a 50K salary. But I think for tonight, if you're playing like the regular players, the guys that people actually want to play, you got to be leaving 2K, 3K. I would leave up to 7K in some lineups. Like it's always going to be the case, but I think for tonight, even more pronounced. Powell switched for Greg Joseph. All right, that's the way to do it. Just getting Vikings field goals. It would not shock me if this were a slate either, where it's a 5-1 with one build or one player from the Vikings, and that could be Greg Joseph. That could be the Vikings D. That could be KJ Osborne. I think 5-1 builds with one of the Vikings, I think will look pretty good tonight and not as duped as they should be. So I guess that's kind of an extra one, but I think that build will look pretty good if you go to somebody that's, again, just the Vikings D as your one player. That's a unique 5-1 always. There we go, guys. That's it for today's showdown video. Went a little bit long, but appreciate all of you guys, again, tolerating me being 15 minutes late. Appreciate all of you. Follow me at Chris Spags. Follow the show at Splash Play Pod. Let's get it in good tonight, guys. Just play some unique lineups. Do what you can to get different on this big slate. That's the only way you're going to have a shot to win the money, is to get less duplicated. So do that. Of course, go check out probably.com, getting some good bets for tonight's game as well. You can find it on our events page, on our Explore page. Go check it out there. All the bets that are available for tonight. You can always check through for free. Find out good values, find out all the probabilities for things to hit at probably.com for free. Follow me at Chris Spags. Follow the show at Splash Play Pod. I might have done that already. And of course, please do subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment, all that. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Again, good luck as always. Enjoy your days. I'll see you guys soon. And if I don't take it down, hope you do. Bye. Good luck.